because like I grew up in that system, the same system you grew up in, and nobody tells you that there's another option. Like the only thing you're told is like, you need to go to a good college, and it's got to be an expensive college. And it's like, that's what's programmed in your brain.
Welcome to the studio. Welcome to the Powerful One podcast, everybody. If you are new to the channel, I just want to break down real quick what Powerful One's all about. It's my personal brand, it's my business, and it's all about, you see the logo, it's just all about dividing yourself from kind of the bubble and the circle of the norm and really going out and trying things and finding out what you enjoy in life. Because, as Charley and I talk about in this podcast, one thing that we found, growing up is that there was no other options. And so that's part of my story, and it's also part of Charley's story, is being able to branch out and try different things and kind of go against the grain and find yourself in the process and be powerful in yourself and be powerful in what you love and who you are. So that's a big part of who I am. It's a big part of who Charley is. It's a big part of the Powerful One brand and the Powerful One identity. And so great episode for you guys, episode 19 with Charley Hughes. We talk about everything from growing up in the private school life, me and him both, and what that's like and some of the experiences and some of the things you're conditioned to follow and believe and such. And then we talk about kind of breaking out of that and how he was able to do it, how I was able to do it, and his journey through joining the service university as the Merchant Marines Academy. And he talks about his experience there, his experience traveling, his experience finding a great group of people around him and really finding something he enjoys in fitness as well. We talk a lot about mentality. We talk a lot about good parts, the bad parts of his journey, what he was able to learn from both the good and the bad, and everything in between. Amazing, amazing episode with a very powerful person who I'm very proud to call a good friend. And you guys are gonna love it. Here it is, Powerful One, episode 19, Charley Hughes. Powerful One podcast here with Charley Hughes. Charley is in Baltimore now. He's getting ready to be shipped overseas, going back overseas. But he wanted to hop on the podcast, and I really wanted to get him on for a while. We know each other from high school. We both went to the same private school for a little while. So yeah, bro, how you living?
I'm great, man. Doing real well. I'm getting ready to head on the ship. Getting ready to get back in the weight room for the first time in almost 2 months, which I'm excited for. So
dude, I feel for you. See, like my training styles is more body weight oriented, but like someone, who lives in the gym, I feel for you, bro.
That's the thing. That's been the challenge. I'm trying to learn, what you guys do. I've been trying to cross over, and do the body weight thing and do more of the calisthenics stuff. And I always joke that I'm not really functional,
Right.
I just do the kind of classic bodybuilding stuff. So obviously not having a gym has been pretty tough, but I'm making it work. So
yeah, man, I can tell you're posting a lot of cool stuff, giving people a lot of ideas about ways to make it work. Cause like it's one of those things, if you want it bad enough, you'll find a way. So
exactly.
So yeah, bro, let's I guess go from high school, because we went to the same high school for a little while. And something we talked about on this podcast before, but just kind of that bubble of private school that really, if you don't step out of it, a lot of times that's all and it can be hard for some people. And that's one thing that I like to do here is encourage people to step away from it. I know you've had a similar experience. So if you want to just talk about high school, college, and some of your experiences with that, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could probably go on for days about it. I'll start off just, I don't want to send the wrong messages to the viewers. So I'll start off and say that, I went to a good high school. Obviously, we grew up in the same private school system. I enjoyed my high school. At the time, I was happy as hell. I thought it was great. Had a lot of good friends, got along with everybody. And the school, it was a good school. I was very fortunate. Like my family sent me to a great school. They supported me. And I did well and I flourished there. So I had a great experience. But what I will say is, looking back on that experience 5 years later, through a different lens, I've realized things and thought about things that I never thought about when I was in high school. Because like you mentioned, I was in a small bubble, right? We all lived in such a small little world. Our world was Baltimore County. Our world was lacrosse culture. And I think the podcast with Charley was very interesting. And I agreed with a lot of those points that it's a very kind of conformist little culture and little society. And I think when you're in it at the time and that's all you don't realize what's actually out there. You don't realize that people have different styles and fashions and wear different types of clothes. You don't realize people care about different sports and have different interests and even values and belief systems.
Yeah.
You know, at the time, I fit into that kind of conformist culture, and I'm guilty of being one of, you know, the lacrosse guys. I wore the gear, I had the long hair, I played on some high level teams, and I don't regret any of those experiences. I think they were good experiences. I had a lot of fun doing it, but at the time, I never considered that, you know, maybe it was kind of like a tool of like social survival, of, you know, fitting into the crowd,
right,
not sticking your neck out, not really going against the grain or the status quo, you know, kind of do what's cool, do what's accepted. And that, you know, I was part of that lacrosse culture. And I'd say that I got along with just about everybody at the time. And that was, you know, I was a people pleaser, to say the least. Right. And looking back on it, I think it's interesting because I would agree with Charley in that it's a real conformist culture. You know, we're all brought up in that little bubble. Everyone's brought up to follow a checklist, you know, steps 1 through 10. And if you deviate from that checklist, you know, you get funny looks. People kind of scoff at you. They laugh at you. So I think we are all, you know, brought up to think that, you know, you go to this nice private school, you play lacrosse, you try to get a lacrosse scholarship, you know, make the varsity team. If that fails, then you go, you know, find a cool fraternity, and then you join a college based on the cool fraternity. And you know, you drink for 4 years, and you graduate and move home, and you know, and you fall into this routine, like you guys called it, the rat race, I believe. Kind of just this cycle, and I think people are just comfortable in that high school bubble. They get comfortable. I know I was very comfortable. Something I'll talk about too. Is, you know, I did 14 years at the same school growing up, from kindergarten through senior year, including pre-first. So I had 14 straight years in private school, which meant that I never had to change schools, change cities. I never had to really branch out and like make new friends and meet new people. So I was very comfortable. And as a result, I did well. I had fun. But looking back on that experience, I think that, and I'll talk about the culture, and this isn't specific to any one school or any one person or even group of people.
Right.
But I look at the culture that we grew up in, and I would say that it enables mediocrity, right? Mediocrity was kind of like the standard. And like I said, there isn't any one person that set this,
For sure.
set the pace or was responsible for this. I mean, if anything, maybe it's a parenting issue. If I were to, you know, point fingers, maybe it's a parenting issue. Maybe it's peer-to-peer interactions and just kind of perpetuating this culture. But there was a culture that it enabled mediocrity. And I won't use the word like promote, because I don't think anyone like actively promotes mediocrity, right? No parent tells their child like, hey, you know, go be a mediocre student or go be a mediocre athlete. Nobody says those things outright, but I think that we all kind of accepted it. And I think you'll agree with this, and tell me if you don't, but you know, when we were in high school, the cool thing to do was to not care and to not try.
Yeah.
Right. That was the cool thing to do. The less you cared, the less you tried, kind of the cooler you were. And of course, then, you know, as a result, nobody went against the status quo. Nobody, you know, really was super passionate. And of course, there's exceptions to every rule. So, you know, I'm making a blanket statement. There were kids that didn't play lacrosse. There were kids that had other interests and that were passionate and that did go against the grain. And maybe they took heat for it, you know, but, and maybe we didn't even recognize it at the time. But I think it's interesting because, you know, there is kind of this mediocrity, and I think it takes root. And, you know, when you do excel at something or you try hard at something, you're risking criticism, negative feedback.
Yeah.
You're sticking your neck out there. And one example I'll use, which I thought about, was, you know, we had these really good athletes that we played with in high school in all different sports. And, you know, they wanted to get the game winning goal or the buzzer beater, right? They wanted to win the championship game, but you would have never caught them ever working really hard during practice, not in front of their friends.
Right.
And I noticed that pattern, and I thought that's really interesting. When they're at practice with all their friends, the cool thing wasn't to come in first place and win sprints. The cool thing was to come second to last. You know, the first place guy was kind of the loser because he made everyone else look bad.
Yeah, he was the try hard, so to speak.
Yep, the try hard, right? So, and I think that's interesting concept. And even like, you know, showing up early to practice. If you showed up early and you did sprints on your own, or I'm not saying it because I did these things. I wasn't some star athlete, but, you know, if you stayed after practice and hit the weight room, it wasn't the cool thing to do. You know, people looked at you like you had three heads. And like I said, I didn't hit the weight room in high school. I wasn't some star athlete. But I did notice those things in hindsight, looking back, going, wow, you know, the people that really did put in the extra time and hours, that was the uncool thing to do, to be first place during the sprints. And my college experience was very different, which I'll touch on later. But I just thought that was interesting to look back at the culture. And I think it could, you know, maybe it has to do with just age. Maybe it has to do with teenage guys. Like I said, it's not specific to one school. I think we saw it in every school in our system. I think you'd find it all over the country. But I think it's interesting because I think there was a fear to put yourself out there and to take those risks and to work really hard. And that is one reason I did end up choosing a service academy. Because I always knew deep down inside that I wanted something more out of life. I was like, I wanted a challenge. I wanted to work hard. I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to prove to myself that I could do these things. And I think in high school at the time, maybe subconsciously, I knew I was working hard and I was very involved, but I knew that, you know, I needed an environment where I could really focus and really work hard and be surrounded by people, like-minded people that were doing the same thing, where, you know, working really hard wasn't uncool. So I think that was interesting. And looking back on it, I see it more now than I ever did when I was living in the little bubble, you know?
Right. I think it's interesting that you say that even kind of after the fact, like after high school, you had that kind of desire for wanting more, because I do relate to that. But it's one of those things that I feel like we're so programmed and so conditioned to, you know, like we had said, like run that rat race and kind of be mediocre, right? I mean, and it's not something that, you know, that's the only reality we know, because that's really all there is. And so I find it very interesting, and I think that's what makes you unique, is the fact that even though that's all you knew, and like you said, we were in that bubble wrap, you still had something in the back of your head where you're like, I'm ready for, like, I need something different. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly. And it's funny because I wasn't always like that. You know, when I was probably a freshman, sophomore in high school, I thought, you know, there's a time where I wanted to do the lacrosse thing, kind of like Charley Hughes mentioned. I wanted to take the lacrosse route. You know, that's what everyone wanted to do, right?
Hey, bro.
I mean, even kids that didn't really play lacrosse wanted to learn to play lacrosse and get the gear and be on the team. And I wanted to play that route. And I joined the club teams and traveled and did all that. And then there was a point where I thought, well, maybe I'll just do the fraternity route. And I remember for a little while I was set on, hey, maybe I'll go to a college down south, you know, where it's got nice weather, and join a fraternity and have fun. And it took some maturing because my brother was 2 years ahead of me and he went to the same academy. So when I was going into my junior year of high school, he was a plebe at the academy, and I visited him a few times that year. And you know, the first couple times I went up, I thought, this guy is just nuts. I thought I was like, there's no way. Like, why? At the time, I was young. I was, you know, playing JV lacrosse, won a championship, and that, like I said, that was my bubble. It was the lacrosse world. It was lacrosse culture, and you know, we didn't know better. So when I went up and visited him, I thought, you know, who would give up their summer break to go to Indoc to get screamed at and do push-ups, and you know, you don't have a social life for 4 years, so. I remember thinking, this guy's just crazy, man. Like, who would do that? I'm joining a fraternity. Maybe I'll play lacrosse if I get a scholarship. And that was kind of where my head was at, you know, even up to probably the end of sophomore year. And then the more I started to visit him and see what he was doing, and I hung around him and his friends, it was like, wow. I remember just being shocked. Like, his college buddies from the academy would come to our house, or we'd go to the beach. And these kids, they were very different, you know, they were unique. They had visions. They had, you know, big vision. They were very driven. They were very goal oriented. And then going up to the campus to visit him and seeing some of the ceremonies and meeting different people and seeing how it operated with the whole regimented lifestyle and the working out and all that stuff. And there was a point in time when he said to me, he's like, hey man, like, I know you're looking at colleges, and, how cool would it be if you joined me here, and, you got in really good shape, and we, be taking class in the same building. I could show you the ropes. And I always wanted to join the maritime industry from a young age. But at a point in time, I was thinking short term, and I thought, I'm going to go to some fun college and party for 4 years, which luckily I had good guidance from my dad, my brother. And it was like, listen, that's all fun. It's all fun. And a lot of people do it and they have a good time. But, joining the maritime industry, it only made sense for me to go to the Merchant Marine Academy. That was like the perfect school for what I want to do. And when my brother said that to me, I actually remember that caught my attention, because he was when he was in high school, he's not a big athlete. And he's, he stopped playing sports eventually in high school. And his focus was on technology and electronics. And he was inventing things and building all sorts of crazy equipment. And he had little businesses he was running. And he was big into programming and all the computer stuff, which is very cool. So that was his interest, and it always has been, but he was never athletic. He was never in great shape. And when I saw him go to the academy, his plebe year, it's like a light switch got flipped. The kid changed a lot, and he got in incredible shape. And, he's in better shape than just about every one of his classmates. And I'm thinking, here's the kid that did robotics in high school, and that was into technology, and he wasn't the star lacrosse player, and he wasn't, some star wrestler, but he got in incredible shape, and really, he just pulled it together. And it's not like he was, it's not like he didn't already have it together in high school, but I saw the transformation that took place just his freshman year, let alone all 4 years. And he flourished there and did very well. So watching that happen, like I said earlier, I kind of was like, man, like I'd almost be dumb to pass up this opportunity to follow in his footsteps and do what he's doing and challenge myself. And I do like a good challenge, and I like to stay busy. I like to work hard. When I was in high school, I knew that I wanted something more, and seeing my brother at the academy, it really inspired me to join him and to take that same path. I saw how hard he was working and what he was getting out of it. And I thought, this would be pretty cool to take it to the next level and try to accomplish something pretty great. So
it's cool that you were able to have an experience like that, because I feel like, that's obviously a catalyst that led to you joining, Merchant Marines, and then that led to so much more. So, I think that's one thing that I always try to, and I'm going to go at some point to go back to my old high school, St. Paul's, and speak, and just try to convince people to take those experiences, go maybe visit somebody doing something, or talk to somebody who's doing a trade job or something like that. So you can understand that there's really more than just the college, like we talked about,
going to a big university, university, and getting a kind of a generic degree.
Right.
And then, people spend 30, 40 years, their whole life, paying off student loans. So I do think it is kind of, in some sense, it doesn't make sense. It's not a good investment.
Right.
And, I was fortunate to go to the academy, and it costs very little money. So the way it works is you pay, small fees every year, and that's basically for haircuts, for uniforms, and that's about it. So it costs almost nothing to go there. It's, and you have a commitment afterwards. So I'm sailing for 5 years on U.S. flag vessels, and then I'm in the Navy Reserve for 8 years. So that's part of your commitment. But it's great because you still get that 4-year degree, and you get that education, and you don't have to put yourself in tremendous debt or take out student loans or spend a lot of money doing it. And I think you're right. And that's something I didn't realize when I was in high school. It was just go talk to the college counselor and apply to Vanderbilt. And then that was the path. And nobody really encourages, like you said, a trade school or a different route. And what I realized in college is that, even community college, this is a funny topic. So, when we were in high school, I remember this very well. Anytime someone mentioned community college, the whole room got quiet and everyone's eyes went back in their head. And it was like a scary word. Community college was like, a terrifying word for a lot of folks. And I remember the reactions, hearing people talk about it and hearing, graduates and alums that we knew that ended up in community college. And And at the time it was this big, scary thing. You don't want to go there. You don't want to go to community college. But when I went to Kings Point, I realized it's actually very normal. It's a very normal path. And the reason is because it's affordable. You still get a good education, and it's much more affordable than a lot of these big universities are. And you're saving yourself a ton of money and even time. And you're not just, paying $200,000 or $250,000 to go drink for 4 years and make poor decisions. So, I didn't realize that when I lived in a small little bubble and world, that community college is a very real option. And a lot of Americans go that route, and it's not a scary thing. It's for a lot of people, it's the only option,
right. It's so interesting, dude, because like that was one of those things, like you'd hear about someone who was transferring to community college, you'd be like, oh shit, like they're screwed, like they're done.
Oh, exactly. I mean, that was like the talk of the town. It was like, oh my God, and it was like the death sentence. And now you realize like a lot of people use that as a step to get to the next step and to get an affordable education. And, who knows, maybe more Americans go to community college than they do to these big, expensive schools.
I mean, I remember from my graduating class, when I did end up going to public school, we had most of our people were going to community college. And it's one of those things too. I mean, like I live in Anne Arundel County now. Anne Arundel County Community College is one of the best in the country. So, I mean, you're saving tons of money. A lot of people listening who haven't gone that private school bubble wrap route are going to be very surprised that that's a thing, but it's a real thing. I'm glad you brought that up.
Oh, absolutely. And that's something to touch on, is that when you grow up in that little bubble, people just don't talk about these things. It's right. No one speaks about it. And like we said, when people do speak about it, they almost give you that funny look, oh, community college. And it's like, it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. It helps a lot of people get a great education and get in the workforce. And it actually, in many cases, makes a lot more sense than some big expensive school, especially depending on what degree you get. I think a lot of people get, some BS degrees that aren't really competitive and that don't do a whole lot for them. And they realize that, when they graduate and they struggle with employment and they have all this student debt looming over their head, it's like a shock. So I think you're right. I think that, there isn't one right method. There's not just one way to do things. There's not just one recipe for success. There's a lot of different ways, whether it is a trade school or a community college, or it's no school at all, whether it's starting a business or taking the entrepreneurial route, kind of like you're doing, which is pretty cool. So that's something we didn't talk about a lot. And I'm glad that I got to see and experience different things in college and after college and even traveling the world. You realize your priorities change. My priorities have changed. My perspective has changed. And I'll kind of segue into my college experience. We talked about it earlier so one of the big, talk about culture shock. One of the big kind of culture shocks for me was going from the private school experience, 14 years of private school, to a federal service academy. When I got there, I reported like less than 4 weeks after I graduated from high school. And when I got there, we are in big group settings during INDOC, which is, you're getting screamed at and yelled at and doing push-ups during the summertime. And some of the upperclassmen, the drill instructors, they called them, they would ask us, why did you choose this school? It's one of the few times you're allowed to speak. They'd say, so why are you here? And they'd go around the room and you'd tell them, why you chose the Merchant Marine Academy. And, I gave an honest answer and said, well, my dad works in the industry and my brother, went to this school or goes to school. And, I've always wanted to join this industry since I was very young. And a ton of people around me answered that question and said, I chose this school because I couldn't afford college. My family doesn't have any money for college and for school. So this was the best thing that I could do. And they wanted to serve their country, and they wanted to kind of be part of something bigger than themselves. And like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't cost a lot to go to a federal service academy because of the commitment. So, a lot of them were there because that was the best thing that they could do. And it was a good option. I respect them for doing that. And they worked their tails off, throughout their childhood and throughout their high school experience. They worked very hard to get good grades and to be competitive in that application process. And and they knew that that was it. You know, if they didn't get in, then they probably weren't going to college and getting a degree. So, you know, for me to hear that, it was like, wow. So this is the reality in the country, is that a lot of people don't just, you know, kind of cruise through high school and then, you know, apply to big expensive colleges and party for 4 years. A lot of people really have to work hard too. And then continue to work. You know, once they got in, it wasn't like they were cruising for 4 years at the academy. So that was a culture shock for sure.
Yeah, man. And it's like we had talked about a little bit before, like, you know, I had a similar thing when I went to public school, and I talk about like dropping a lot of my buddies off at single parent houses. And like, that's a reality for a lot of people, you know, like one income, one family member having income. And if you're going to any college, it's because you've worked very hard to be able to, you know, put yourself in a position, like I guess a lot of the people you were classmates with. But, you know, it's one of those things, like if you never put yourself in that position, who knows? And if you know, if I didn't go to public school, I would like to think we'd probably still be blinded by that, just kind of, you know, we would have never left that initial bubble wrap structure,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. And we were in a small world, and honestly, I don't blame anybody. I wouldn't blame myself. I wouldn't blame anybody else, because we didn't know better.
Absolutely.
What I think the tragedy is, and we mentioned this, is that a lot of people will never learn that, and they will never experience that. That's what I think the tragedy is. Fortunately for me, going to the academy opened my eyes to a lot of things that I hadn't seen before. So I'm glad that I did pick up on these things, and I had these kind of eye-opening experiences when I was at the academy, and when I traveled the world. That's a whole nother piece of it.
Yeah.
But you know, I think a lot of people, like you said, they never really leave that comfortable little world. And not everybody's meant to, you know, not everybody is meant to pack up their bags and leave home and travel to the other side of the world. And I understand that. And everybody has different interests and different career paths. And some of those career paths keep them in their hometown.
Right.
So that's the reality of it. But I do think it is healthy to travel and to experience different things and to meet different people who challenge your like conventional beliefs, because I was set in my way in high school. And, you know, as a young, dumb high school kid, I probably thought that I had it all figured out when I was going to college. And obviously I didn't. And I'm glad that I got out of the bubble and tried something new and met new people. And like I said, I still have, you know, many great friends from high school. I talk to them quite a bit. They're great people. And I met many awesome people in high school. So, you know, like I said, it's not, it's more of a cultural thing. It's not any one person or individual. Sure. I just think it's passed on from generation to generation and year to year. And I think that a lot of these discussions are just never had. You know, no one mentions it in the classroom. No one mentions it at the dinner table, right? It's kind of just for you to figure out, if you ever do figure it out.
Right. And I think, to your point, like, I think that life is for a lot of people. I think there's a lot of people who, like, they know what they want to do. They want to be a doctor. But I think, like you saying, like, to have options, or to know that there is other options,
right,
is really the big thing. And I think it takes platforms like this, people like you and me who've seen both sides of the coin, to be able to at least help people, just to show you whether you want to step outside that box or not. It's fine if you don't want to, but at least knowing that there is a choice to do that, you know. Like,
absolutely. I agree. And, you know, even style differences, you know, we laugh and joke about the lacrosse and the vineyard vines. And I still think, you know, at one point I was wearing all that stuff. I was wearing the baggy button down and the loose tie, and I had the long hair. So, you know, I took part in that in high school. You know, everything was pastel colors. That was the cool thing to do. I've kind of moved away from that. But, you know, going to college and realizing, as kind of a funny example, but, you know, not everybody wears vineyard vines and Sperry's and, you know, and short shorts. So, and polo, all, you know, the whole deal. So, you know, that, I think some people that don't leave the bubble, they don't ever see those things and realize that there are different styles in California and Alaska and Texas and Florida. And not everybody thinks that the prep, you know, culture is cool or trendy. So that was something that was interesting, just to meet different people and learn about different interests and hobbies that people have on the West Coast that we never even talk about on the East Coast.
Yeah, that's one thing I'd like you maybe if you want to talk about more is how just the traveling to so many different places kind of helped you get that cultural shock a little bit. Because I know that's something I'd encourage a lot of people to do is like just go travel and just see that like dude, when I go to California, like I'll come back and my whole world's changed because like I see the homeless population, I see that people are it's almost like we're 10 years behind them. And so when I see stuff going on over there, I'm like, man, it's the same country, but it's a different world. And so you've been all over the world. So talk about some of maybe experiences like just from traveling the world that have really opened your eyes to stuff that you never knew existed.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think travel's great. I think anybody that can do it should do it. Fortunately for me, travel can be expensive at times. So I was lucky because at our school, part of the 4-year curriculum is actually you spend a full year at sea on a ship as a cadet. It's broken up into 2 sailings. So I did about 3 months my first sailing, and I did about 6 months my second sailing. So I had to get 300 days, basically, 300 days at sea in total. But, it's on the government dime. So, you're not paying for airfare and for hotel rooms and all that stuff. You're actually working on a ship and going into all different ports and, going to every corner of the globe, basically. Which is very interesting. I traveled to over a dozen different countries, over 4 different continents in a span of about 2 years. And I'm still doing that now after graduation. I'm still sailing all over the place. But, it's interesting. And we talked about this, as cadets in our industry, we talk about this a lot. When you're sailing on a ship and working on a ship, you go to places like working ports that you would never actually pay money to go to as a tourist or a traveler. And that's something people don't consider. So, when I say, hey, I spent 2 years traveling the world in college, I'm not talking about like an abroad semester, in the Ritz-Carlton in Italy, where the only guy that you interact with is like the bellman. I'm talking about like we're pulling into working ports in some of the poorest countries and some of the wealthiest countries in the world. These big hubs of international trade. And you're working with real people that are working real jobs and real hours, and they have their families to take care of. And like I said, you go to some of the poorest places in the world that you would never buy a plane ticket. Some places you couldn't even fly to. They don't have an airport on the map over there. So, I went to 2 spots in Africa on the East and West Coast. Some of the poorest, basically, towns in the world. They live in little wood shacks. They barely have a roof over their head. The floor is mud and dirt. So I've been to some pretty interesting places, and I've interacted with, every different culture. Been to Europe, been to Africa, been to the Middle East. I've been to the Far East, all over Asia. So I've interacted with all different cultures and different kinds of people. And it goes back to the small world and breaking out of your bubble. And it shows you, it shows you things that you would have never considered, when we were in high school. I would have never thought about these things in high school. And you can't even learn about them in the textbook. It's right. And you can read about it on the internet. You can read about it in a book. You can be, an academic and learn about it in academia. But it's one of those things until you actually go and meet these people and have a beer with these people in their hometown and try to communicate, even though you don't speak the same language. Yeah. It's pretty incredible. And it definitely changed my perspective. And I will say the biggest lesson that I got from traveling the world is just how insignificant we are, right? Because in our little society, in our world, and I'll go back, to the world we grew up in, I think some people, like we said, are scared to step out of their comfort zone, right? They don't want to leave. They don't want to leave their comfort zone because if you go to a different state or country, nobody knows your last name. And it's like, who are you? Right? You're nobody, right? Now in your own kind of bubble or circle, you might be important, but the moment you step out of your bubble, you're no longer important. And you realize that very fast when you're in Africa and, they're very poor. They don't care about what we care about. We joke about like first world problems. If they heard you complaining, that your iPhone isn't charging properly or it takes too long to charge, they'd laugh in your face because they're walking miles to get their fresh water. So, and it's just interesting to see real people's struggles and to see how they live, and then to think back how fortunate we are. And it makes you feel very small. It makes, traveling, especially when you travel by ship, right? You're traveling thousands and thousands of miles by sea, so you feel it, you feel it with every rock and roll. You feel it with the waves. I mean, you're traveling very far, and it's not like you're hopping in a jumbo jet, and time traveling a couple hours to Europe,
Yeah.
You're on the long haul going from port to port and ocean to ocean. And it's an incredible experience. And I'm so glad I got to do it. And I got to do it without shelling out money. I didn't have to pay for hotel rooms and plane tickets. So I was fortunate in that sense. And that's why I really did enjoy my college experience. You get to do things that not a lot of people get to do in their entire lifetime through that kind of that Sea Year program. So.
Yeah, man, it sounds priceless. It really does. And the fact that, obviously it didn't cost a lot, I feel like is incredible. I mean, what would you say, I guess, would be the hardest part about being at sea?
Yeah. So it's funny, because I'm in quarantine right now, and we're on quarantine. So, and actually, me and my buddies will joke about it, because that's kind of what we do for a living. You get on a ship, you go out, and in my case, I'll be out for about 75 days, which is, 2.5 months. And that's actually one of the shorter hitches. You call it a hitch. That's one of the shorter hitches out there. Wow. A lot of guys will do 130 days, 140 days. Some guys will do 4 straight months. So 75 is a pretty good schedule for me. I enjoy it. By the time you kind of get sick of it and you're ready to get home, then you're packing your bags and heading back. Being out there, you get used to it. As I did it as a cadet in school. So that was kind of my first actual deep sea experience, seagoing experience. So by now I'm pretty used to it, but I'll say it definitely, it takes a little while to get used to it. Some people get seasick and they have to deal with, the rocking and rolling back and forth, and it might go all day long and it might go through the night, depending on the weather conditions. So that's something that, people don't talk about a lot, is you might finish a long work day on the ship and get in bed and you're rolling around all night. I mean, there's no way to really brace yourself. So, you're in your bed, just rolling back and forth from side to side all night. And you're trying to stick your arm out and stick your leg out, and you're trying to brace yourself against the wall, but it doesn't work sometimes. So, you might have a totally restless night and have to get up with, on 2 hours of sleep and work again. So there obviously are, challenges. You have to be careful if you're in bad weather. When you're working, you have to be careful when you're going up and down, ladders and stairwells and whatnot. The actual isolation piece, being at sea, I don't think it's as bad. I personally, I don't mind it. I like a good routine. I like a good schedule. You work, I work out. We have a gym. So I'll try to eat healthy. I'll try to, hit the gym every day. And then I'll, either read, watch a movie, get in bed and get some good sleep when I can, when we're not rocking and rolling. But it's very kind of regimented. And that's, the academy I think the academy serves its purpose in that, you get used to that regimented lifestyle. And you kind of learn how to live that regimented lifestyle. So when you go to sea, it's not as big of a shock as it would be. But personally, I don't mind it. Obviously, you don't really have a social life out there. It's not like you're really, when you're on the ship, most ships these days are dry ships, meaning that you can't drink alcohol. I know back in the day, probably decades ago, a lot of ships were wet ships, and they actually allowed you to drink when you were off work. But that's no longer the case, because there's so much liability and risk. You don't want your crew drinking on the ship. But I will say, at sea, it can be quiet. It can be lonely when you're out in the middle of the ocean. You might not see land for a month or a month and a half. But the fun part and the kind of reward is when you go into port. Because you go into port, and when you get off work, you get to travel. You get to go into town. You get to go to the local bars and restaurants and clubs, whatever it is, and experience that kind of local nightlife and that social life. So that is kind of like the reward, and that's the fun piece. You'll work for maybe 30 days crossing the Atlantic Ocean or whatever it is, or 14 days, however long it takes. And then, when you pull into Europe, you get to jump off the ship and go have fun and explore when you're not working. So there's a balance, definitely. And I don't think it's for everybody. Some people go to the school and realize this is not for me. I cannot live on a ship. I can't be in isolation that long. This quarantine thing isn't really new to me because of the whole seagoing experience. But yeah, I mean, I just make the best of it, and I try to keep a good routine, and I try to read books and stay happy and work out, stay healthy. So it's not bad.
Yeah. So I guess going off that, I mean, let's talk a little bit more just about sort of obviously your routine. You talk about physically. I want you to get into a lot of this stuff, but obviously, the change you've had over your body from high school to obviously now being graduated is crazy. So talk about maybe a little bit of the benefits, whether it's stuff that routine, physical, mental, some of the real benefits that are stuff that you've been able to take away from those experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just go back to high school real quick and say, when I was in high school and I worked out, I thought it was a chore. I didn't enjoy it. It's a lot of people when you start working out or you start anything that's new, it's miserable because you're not good at it. You don't understand it. It's like you want to look like the biggest, strongest guy in the gym, but it's your first week and it takes time to get there. So, I worked with a trainer in high school a little bit at the Maryland Athletic Club during the off season when I wasn't playing lacrosse. And I remember, counting down the minutes, hour-long session, like, when am I getting out of here? And, if he told me 30 reps, I would do 22 and then stay quiet and he wouldn't know. So I didn't really enjoy it at the time, and it was just miserable. And that's why people have trouble getting started. Of course, I went to the academy, and my brother right away, he had gotten into weightlifting, and he didn't play any sports at the academy. So that was his big focus, as in terms of physical fitness, was weightlifting. And he became very good at it. He got incredible shape. He had a great diet. He had a great routine. And he's the one that started dragging me to the gym my plebe year. I mean, right when I finished Indoc and I was allowed to actually start working out on my own and doing things, he dragged me down a couple times a week. And I probably started for all the wrong reasons. I think I was hitting arms and chest 3 times a week when I started, so, I didn't hit legs for probably the first 2 years, which unfortunately you can still tell. But, so, he dragged me down there and I got really into it, and I was, eating those stuff in my face, and I thought, this is great. I'm going to get in good shape. And, so I did it for probably, I want to say, like 3 months my freshman year. That fall of my freshman year, I was really committed, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was just going down and throwing weights around, right? And I bulked up to about 205, which for me was the heaviest I've ever been. I'm 6 foot, so I was up at 205, and I was eating peanut butter and Cliff Bars like crazy. And then it's interesting because I actually stopped working out like cold turkey. I think the winter rolled around, holidays rolled around. I stopped going. And then I played lacrosse that year. So I got into lacrosse season. And that was kind of like my excuse not to work out, right? My freshman year, I was still in the high school mindset. And this is what I'm excited to share with you and everybody else, is my big shift in mindset that happened, like my transformation. So, right when I got to the academy, it's not like I was a different person. From high school, I was still the same person. I was skinny, 170 pounds, didn't have an ounce of muscle on me. And then I weightlifted. I gave up. I quit. I played lacrosse. I had no interest to get back in the gym. I really didn't think about it much. It just kind of was like, I'm too busy. I have a lot of schoolwork. And at the time after lacrosse season, I was getting ready to go back to sea, or to go out to sea as a cadet. So I had a lot on my plate, and I thought, I'm not going to worry about this. And so I put it on the back burner for quite a while, actually. And all the progress that I actually made my freshman year, I ran all of it off during the cross season. I went from 205, and I literally went down to 170 again by the end of the spring. So, in May of 2016, I was packed down to 170, looked the same, like I did in high school. And then I went to sea for a little bit. And then I came back. It's a very weird, curriculum and schedule because of the sailing period. It's very non-traditional, but I spent my sophomore and junior year at sea, right, sailing in 2 different stints. And it's funny, I had a friend when I was out at sea during my second sailing. I was going into my junior year at the academy, And I was very focused on my schoolwork. That's one thing I didn't mention. When you're a cadet on a ship, you actually have a lot of schoolwork you have to complete. You're getting credits while you're out at sea, and you have sea projects and a lot of writing, a lot of drawings, a lot of kind of studying what's going on. And I was so focused on my schoolwork that I was doing no working out at all. I was doing no physical activity at all. I was eating anything that I wanted. I was bringing ice cream and chips up to my room and stuff in my face every night while I was like typing on my laptop. And I thought, oh, this is well deserved. You know, I'm going to eat like a pig and then I'm going to do homework all night. And one of my buddies on the ship, he grabbed me and was like, man, you got to get in the gym with me, you know? And he was getting into a routine. He was going a couple times a week. He was very consistent, and he had been going almost the entire time we were on the ship. And he was making really good progress. He put on a lot of muscle, a lot of size, got real strong. So he eventually convinced me, and I was stubborn. I was kind of tough. I was like, man, you know, like I'm going to wait till I finish all my schoolwork, and once I finish most of my schoolwork, then I'll join you, which thankfully I did. And he got me down there. And so he kind of got me started again after probably a 2-year break from weightlifting, maybe longer than 2 years. He got me back into it, and it kind of lit like a fire, you know, inside of me. And I had no idea what I was doing. I was doing what I remember from my plebe year. You know, I was just kind of doing the arms, doing the chest, wasn't really hitting shoulders, definitely wasn't hitting legs. And at the time we had very limited gym equipment, right? This particular ship, it had a very simplistic gym setup. There wasn't a whole lot. Didn't have any supplements. Not that supplements are necessary, but I was like, all right, I was just kind of giving it a crack. And then I ended up switching ships. So I went to a new ship, and the new ship that I got on actually had an incredible gym setup. I mean, it had everything that you could ask for, which I was very happy about, because at the time I was starting to get passionate about it. And it's funny, even the captain of that next ship that I got on, he was probably 35. He's pretty young for a captain of a ship. And this guy was in the weight room every day for hours, and he was in incredible shape. He graduated from my school, so we went to the same college. He went to the academy in the early 2000s, and he kind of took me under his wing and started teaching me things and showing me things, you know, because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was just throwing weight around and hitting like the glamour muscles. Yeah. So he really kind of taught me a lot and got me into it. And I just stuck with it. I was just consistent. I just showed up every day. And like, you know, when you're on a ship, another thing that I'll talk about is the ship's rolling a lot. You know, it's not like you're on dry land. So when you're lifting weights, it's something to consider, you know, because the ship's going up and down and left and right, and it's pitching and rolling. So when you're benching or squatting, you have to be very careful, and you have to be very conscious of the fact that that barbell might fly off your back, or you might fall on your face. So that was a challenge, but it makes it kind of fun. You know, it makes I
didn't think about that aspect of it. Yeah,
it's like a fun challenge. Of course, you don't want to hurt yourself. So, you know, I have things like I don't go as heavy when I'm at sea. If the ship's rolling, I'm not going to try to bench 315. There's no way. But so I got into it on that. I stayed with it on that ship, and basically I came home that fall. I came home in September of my junior year, and I was getting ready to start my junior year. My class is back at the academy, and I joined Brick Bodies back at home. And I was there every day until I went back to school, spending hours and hours. You know, I went to GNC and I probably bought out the store, like, oh, this is great. Like, I have supplements, and, you know, I was, you know, spending hours researching, you know, what was good and what wasn't, what works. And, you know, so I got super into it. And my junior year, I went back to school, and, you know, a lot of my buddies were like, wow, what the hell happened to you? You know, like, since when did you get into weightlifting? Because I was so focused and I was so dedicated. Yeah. But it was great because I had a lot of friends at school that were very into it and that were very good at it. And they'd been doing it for years. I mean, these kids have been training for 4, 5, 6 years. So, you know, I basically linked up with a lot of them once I got back to school as a junior. And ever since, I've just, you know, I've basically committed myself. And, you know, I try to do 2 hours a day every day, and stay with it best I can. And a lot of those guys along the way kind of inspired me and encouraged me and pushed me to get in the weight room. And then they taught me, you know, things and kind of took me under their wings. I learned a lot from my college buddies, from my brother, who really kind of like got that fire lit inside.
So what was that real like mindset change? Like what really made you like, shit, I'm gonna get after? Was it the progress, or was there something else that drove you?
You know, it's interesting. I think I would definitely, I think progress has to do with it. You know, I think that when you see results, it can be addicting. Like, oh wow, this is starting to work. You know, and after a couple of weeks, and I think that's why a lot of people quit and a lot of people fail, because they don't see the results immediately. They, you know, after 3 weeks of lifting weights, they don't have big arms, and they're like, well, this isn't for me. I don't have the genetics. And I have a funny story, actually, real quick. When I was a freshman, and I mentioned I weightlifted for about 3 months.
Yeah.
And then I quit for 2 years. I remember I had all these buddies that were these big, strong guys. And I'm talking like some of these guys were 220, 200. One guy was 250 pounds. And I'm talking like lean muscle, like 250. Like, you know, there wasn't an ounce of fat on these guys. And so I gave it my best shot for about 3 months. And I remember telling them and telling my brother, I was like, hey man, like I've been hitting arms, 3 times a week, man, for, 3-4 weeks now. And I'm just not seeing like crazy results. And I specifically remember telling people that I just didn't have the genetics.
Wow.
Which now I laugh at myself, because I'm like, I didn't know a damn thing at the time.
Right.
And I wanted overnight success, which I think everybody, in some aspect, wants that magic pill or that quick fix. And that's why it's tough to get in shape and to maintain the in shape state. But I actually told kids, those words came out of my mouth that, hey man, I've been doing it for about a month and I just don't have the genetics, and my buddies were probably looking at me like I was cross-eyed. Like, are you kidding? If you just started, your diet's terrible. You have no idea what you're doing. You're not really dedicated to it. You're kind of just, winging it. So at the time, I just thought it wasn't for me. And then I'm glad I got back into it. And as far as the mindset goes, I've always said this since I've been in college and left college. I think my college friends had like probably the biggest impact on me in my transformation and my mindset. And the reason I say that is, I mentioned it's a unique crowd. Like a service academy attracts a unique crowd. And the people that I was surrounded by were incredibly hardworking, incredibly driven. People didn't just end up there at that school, right? Just like on accident, right? Or because they got lucky. It was people were there. If you think about the school itself, it's a hard 4 years, and it's you go to sea you spend 300 plus days at sea. So if you apply to that school, you got to be pretty driven and goal oriented, especially to get through and graduate in 4 years, because it's so different and it's a tough process. So a lot of the people I was around, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. And I talked about the example in sports earlier. From high school, I said the cool thing was to be like second to last. It wasn't to be first. What I noticed is when I compare and contrast different experiences. When I was in college, and I played lacrosse for 4 years in college, which a lot of people don't know. I played it at the academy. It was D3. It was really something to do. It's one of those things where there's like nothing to do, when you're stuck on campus. So I played the sport, and I had great friends, and I had good teammates, and I had a fun time doing it. It was obviously very different lacrosse from what we grew up with and what we were familiar with. It wasn't as high level, but the team captains on the field were coming in first place every time. And they were doing extra laps before practice, and they were staying after practice. So I realized like, wow, like, these guys were really setting an example, and and it sounds cliche. Everyone's like lead by example, but these guys were leading by example, and they wanted to be first and win sprints. Yeah. That way they would encourage you and everybody else to keep up with them and to try to catch them. Right. Or to try to outperform them. So that was their way of leading by example. And the cool thing in college, for me, the cool thing at our school was to work hard, which I loved. And like I said, I knew deep down, I knew that I wanted something more. And I knew that I thrived off of competition and hard work. And I'm a competitive individual, so, but I thrive off of that kind of stuff, and I enjoy it. And I like having friends that challenge me and push me and motivate me. And I like to do the same. It's not for everybody, but it's kind of the tough love thing. And that was a big thing, was my mental transformation. a lot of the people I were around, they wouldn't, when you sat down at the dining hall to eat a meal, they would question you if you were eating garbage food. They would say, man, really? Like, are you serious? Like, come on, man. Like, you don't need another piece of pizza. And it was the tough love. It wasn't like they were trying to insult you. They were looking out for you. They were actually looking out for your well-being, and they were encouraging you to do better. And the example I use is that, when I was in college, people would encourage you to study harder, right? Stay up later and study harder, and get up earlier and work out more or work out harder. So it was kind of the mindset of the people that I was around. And this is a full 360. It goes back to culture, right? So the culture at this school was very different. It was, like I said, the cool thing was to be in first place. The cool thing was to work hard. Yeah. The cool thing was to excel at all your activities and to take risks, right? And people did it all the time. People put their necks out there. People took risks. People weren't afraid to be loud and to stand up for things that they believed in. And we joke about it. It's like, when you go to a service academy, you get a lot of like type A personalities in one room. It's like everybody's a type A personality. There's too much testosterone. So, you can kind of joke about it, but what it does is it really kind of creates an environment where everybody is pushing everybody. And like I said, when you're the first guy in wind sprints, that's the cool thing to do. It's not, people don't scoff and laugh and point fingers and think, oh, what a loser, he's making us look bad. So, and I respected people that did that. When I saw people before practice, working out and working on their own, I thought that's really cool. So when I was immersed in that environment, my plebe year, I was just watching these things. I was like slowly like picking up on these things. Right. And another example I'll use is one of my best friends from college. He was a serious wrestler, unbelievable athlete. Kid weighed, at one point he weighed probably 70 pounds more than I did, and he could run twice as fast as me. So he was just an unbelievable athlete, and he had a few knee injuries, and I mean serious, like blowout knee injuries throughout our college career. And the ACL, the meniscus, the whole deal. So he was on crutches, and he couldn't bear any weight, and he had the cast or the brace on his knee. And what actually like blew my mind, and this there was a few people that did this, but what blew my mind is this kid would go to the gym every day with his crutches, with his knee brace, and he can't bear weight, which means that you just can't pick up dumbbells and walk around. You can't just easily get up off a bench and change the weights and do a drop set. So this kid was working twice as hard down there than anybody. And he was there every day, bench press, curls. He was doing, he couldn't hit lower body. He couldn't squat and lunge, but he was hitting everything that he could possibly still hit. And he was there more than just about everybody else in the school who was healthy and had two working legs and who had a functional body. So, going down to the gym and seeing this kid with crutches and a knee brace every day, that's the kind of stuff where you're like, good Lord, you're like, maybe I need to toughen up. And I think there was self-reflection of like, I'm telling myself, well, I'm playing lacrosse, so maybe I can't. Yeah, man. And that was a big struggle for me at one point. Was I thought that I had to choose between lacrosse or weightlifting, and it was a serious conversation I had with myself. I was like, well, I'm playing lacrosse. I don't want to like let down my team and my coaches, but I really want to focus on lifting, and I want to commit all my time to lifting. So at one point, I think it was my junior year when I came back, I thought, I either have to I have to quit lacrosse and tell my coach that I'm quitting, or B, I have to quit weightlifting and then resume it after the season. And I didn't want to lose all my progress and everything. And then I had a tough conversation with myself, and I looked at myself in the mirror one night and I said, why can't you do both? Like, there's absolutely no reason you can't do both. So what I did is I got stubborn, and I got really driven at the time. And I basically planned out my day so that I could go to a 2-hour lacrosse practice after school, and then I could do 2 hours in the weight room, and then I could study. So the thing is, I was getting 5 hours of sleep on average every night, 5 to 6 hours, for my junior and senior year, probably my sophomore year as well. My sophomore year was very tough academically, but my junior and senior year, I was operating on very little sleep. And it was one of those sacrifices that I made because I could sleep for 8 hours or 10 hours if I went to bed super early. But I just looked at myself and got serious. And I said, if there's kids in the weight room every day of the week, hobbling around on crutches, why can't I just find 2 extra hours during my day to go hit the weight room? And sometimes I'd go at 11 at night. I'd go at midnight, or after I finished a lab report, or I'd go early. A lot of people would work out during lunch. I had a roommate that went on into special forces. And there's another example of somebody who I lived with for quite some time, as roommates. And he was training 2-3 times a day. He'd get up early at 4 a.m. some days. He would swim during lunch. Lunch, it's like you get an hour, you get 55 minutes. And you had kids that would sprint from their last class right before lunch. They'd sprint to their room. They'd put on a swimsuit. They'd put on goggles, and then they'd sprint to the pool. And these kids would sprint to the pool just so they could swim for 45 minutes. And then they'd go shower, change, and go back to class. And then they would go back to the weight room after school at 1600, at 4 in the evening, and they would lift before dinner. And they would still get all their schoolwork done. It wasn't like that they were just, simple meatheads, which I think people get that reputation. People that lift weights, people that work out a lot of people just assume that, they're not intelligent. But I realized that you could balance the academics and get really good grades and still work out and still play a sport. So being around people like that really pushed you, it totally changed me as a person. I stopped making excuses, and my friends, they wouldn't let you make excuses a lot. Right. You know what I'm saying? It was the tough love. It was, what are you doing? And then if you were sitting there watching YouTube after school, it's like, what are you doing, man? Like, come on, go hit the weights. So it was a great environment because your friends wanted to prop you up and lift you up. And I think that you read about it a lot on the internet. There's a lot of quotes about it. There's a lot of cliche talk about it. Everyone's, there's, people say, you are the sum of the 5 people you hang around the most, right? Or, surround yourself with good people. And I think people are quick to say that. And I think that's overused a lot, but I don't think people actually take action on it a lot. I think they still hang out with people that they're comfortable with and just, old friends. And while you should be able to separate, a good time from work.
Right.
I think that there's a place for everything. I think that there's a place for going and having fun and going out on the weekends and going to Ravens games or to the bar. And I think there's a place for work and for being serious. But I do think that people underestimate the impact of actually just immersing yourself in an environment with like-minded individuals who are successful, who are driven, and who are better than you. I mean, there was people there that, when I went and sat in the classroom, I thought, good Lord, I thought I studied hard and I thought that I was good at math. And this kid is plugging and chugging equations in his brain that, that he learned years ago, and he still memorized these things. And I'm thinking, where'd that come from? And you get on the athletic field and like I said, you think that you're a hard worker, or you think that you're really committed, and somebody is running circles around you.
Yeah, man.
So being around people that were better than me in different respects, it really challenged me to become better and to try to rise up to the occasion. And like I mentioned to you earlier, when we were just chatting,
right.
People are quick to look at the physical transformation, right? And I'll put up a collage of 2 photos, right? Here's 2 years, here's 4 years, whatever it is. And, it looks superficial, right? Because you're just looking at the surface. And like I said, it's the physical transformation is just a byproduct of the mental transformation. And that's where I think a lot of people fail. They don't achieve their results when it comes to fitness and health and nutrition and weightlifting and, getting in shape, is because they're expecting the quick fix. They don't want to put in the work, and they're still stuck in that mindset. Like we talked, they're still stuck in that small world, that small bubble. They haven't actually stepped out of their comfort zone and learn something new or seen something different. So they fall back on their old ways. And like I said, when I went to the service academy, I was still the same Charley that I was in high school. It took some time, and it took many experiences for me to stop making excuses and for me to get up earlier or stay up later, or say, I can find the time. Arnold famously says, just sleep faster. That's one of his famous quotes. People say, well, I need 8 hours of sleep. And he says, you can operate on 6. You just have to sleep faster. So that's something that I kind of came to grips with. Like whatever I'm telling myself, whether it's, oh, well, I have lacrosse practice tonight, right? When I was in high school, lacrosse practice was my workout. And there was no question. There was no ifs, ands, or buts, right? But now I was like, you know what? I am doing 2 hours of lacrosse practice, but there's no reason I can't do 2 hours of weightlifting as well if I want to maintain my progress and keep progressing forward. So it was a huge mindset shift, and the body is just a byproduct of that, which is fun to see because it gives you like tangible results, right? But I think that for that reason, in some respects, weightlifting, and I'll talk about this too, this is another topic, weightlifting and even, physical fitness gets a bad rap, in some respects, right? And I'll use an example of like, if you dedicate yourself, if you have a hobby like painting or writing novels, if you spend 2 hours a day painting pictures or writing novels, nobody questions it, right? It's like, oh, it's a great hobby and it's so noble and it's academia and it's this and that. But, when you spend 2 hours a day working out and improving your health and working on your body and eating right, a lot of times it gets a bad rap. It's, people say it's selfish and they say it's egotistical and it's vain. And I think people are quick to jump to those conclusions. It goes back to what we talked about, the old culture that we grew up in. Yeah. People are very judgmental. People don't like to see other people go against the status quo and go against the grain. And to be honest, where we grew up, Tommie, it wasn't like working out was the cool thing to do. It really wasn't. Right. And I, at one point, didn't think it was cool at all. At one point, when I was younger, when I saw guys hit in the weight room, I thought the same thoughts. Oh, stupid meathead. And here comes the guy with the blender bottle and the protein shake and the muscle milk. And we would all laugh and joke because that was the culture that we grew up in, and that's what we knew. And the reality is some people still think that way. And I do know that, some people I grew up with and went to high school with or knew at other schools, they're not very receptive to the weightlifting thing, and they don't understand it. Even family and friends that I'm close to, ask and say, are you sure this is what you want to do? And why are you so into it? And don't you think it's too much? I'm sure you've gotten the same feedback. Yeah. When you commit to something, they also say, family and friends, like your close family and friends, are usually the first people to really question you and to push back and to doubt you. And I think a lot of it's out of like, I think a lot of it has to do with they're looking out for your best interest. Right. Like they don't want to see you fail. They don't want to see you fall on your face. They don't want to see you embarrassed or take risks. So I think a lot of that has to do with just they're looking out for you. Yeah. But there obviously is a pushback of like, hey, Charley, don't you think you're working out a little bit too much? Or, you're taking this a little bit too seriously. And like I said, I've always been a hard worker, and I like to give everything 100%. I like to go all in when I do things. So I figured, if I'm going to be working out a lot every day, why not meal prep, right? If I'm going to be spending 2 hours every day lifting weights, why would I eat, McDonald's and drink soda? Because it's totally counterproductive. That might be the cool thing to do, but it's counterproductive. You're wasting your time in the gym if you're gonna maintain a terrible diet. So why not go all in? That's my mindset of, if you're going to spend time in the gym, that's valuable time that you're spending in the gym. Why not feed your body properly and give your body the right food and nutrients and double down and go all in and then see maximum results? Yeah. So I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting, and it does get a bad rap in that regard. But it's one of those things where I've just committed to it and gone full speed, and I know you have too. And you can't look back. You can't turn around. You got to put on horse blinders and just do it. Like we said, you can't think about that conformist culture, because if you're stuck in that mental prison your whole life, you're never going to do anything. You're never going to accomplish anything.
Yeah, to your point, I think that mindset of kind of people saying that and having people around you that aren't pushing you, like you mentioned in that story, that aren't doing those extra reps. Personally, it made me have I was mentally weak. Like, I'll be the first one to say it. I was mentally weak from the way I grew up, from people. A lot of the stuff that I was good at, it was the stuff that you weren't supposed to be good at. And so I can relate to a lot of what you're saying. Like, it wasn't until I had people around me who were pushing me, who were, like that tough love thing. And so I relate to a lot of that, man. And I do think that a lot of it just comes back to that culture and how you're becoming tough or how you're becoming weak, and the stuff around you is aiding in one of the two. So it's really cool to see that you found something that you're super passionate in, and there's so much else that is behind obviously the physical that you've just talked about that people don't see. And I think that some people just won't get it, and that's fine. You get it, and I feel like that's all that matters, man. I think it's super cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's healthy, it's like you obviously you understand, working out, having a good routine. It's a healthy lifestyle. And like we mentioned, some people think it's just superficial, but it's a lot deeper. Some people, it's a good escape. It's a good escape, when you have a tough day or a rough day at work, or you're stressed and you go to the gym, it's a great release. And I think that physical health is directly related to mental health and, and staying sharp. So, I think it's actually, it's bad to neglect physical health. You got to talk about health as like a whole picture, not just one aspect, not just mental health,
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that when people look at it as selfish, it's quite the opposite. I think if you're being, taking care of your physicals, it's going to make your mentals better, and it's going to make you be able to have better relationships with people. I mean, so many different things. If you're taking care of your health in any way, whether it's physically, by working out, eating well, that stuff helps so much into other stuff. I know personally, and tell me if you can relate to this, but if there's a day that I don't get some sort of like workout stimulus in, that day's not right. It's something where like
totally agree.
You know what I mean?
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah. When you miss a workout, right? It's like if you miss a workout, or even when the gym shut down at first, I was a big gym goer, and that was kind of like where I was comfortable in that domain. So it was a shock. It was like, oh man, I gotta start doing body weight stuff, and missing certain days, you feel like you're in like a funk kind of. You're not as sharp. You don't feel as motivated. And as after you hit a workout, the endorphins, like the natural high, it's incredible. It's you're ready. If you go hit a workout before the workday, you're ready to tackle the day, or before class, before school, or you're ready to just tackle the day. And a lot of times I'll hit workouts after, like when I was in college, I would go after classes because I had so much like built up energy.
Right.
I was ready to just go hit the weights and sweat. Or on the ship, a lot of times I'll work out after the workday because I'm ready to just kind of release that stress. And I think there's a healthy aspect, and talk about kind of the status quo and just society in general. I find it funny. I think a lot of things are backwards, right? We talked about the culture of like doing less and not caring is kind of cool, right? And like I said, maybe it has to do with age and maturity, because in the real world that doesn't fly. Right? You're not gonna get hired by a company if you're lazy and you don't care. But the other thing is like drugs and alcohol, right? So you talk about drugs and alcohol, and then you talk about working out. And I've always found this topic to be very interesting. Personally, I never did drugs. I stayed away from them. I do drink occasionally, socially. I'll drink on the weekends and whatnot. But I really try to limit it because obviously it does take its toll on your body. And what I find interesting is drugs and alcohol are so mainstream and so commonplace. Yeah. And 99% of people use them all the time, right? Multiple times a week, drink 2, 3, 4 times a week, especially in college. It's obviously, there's a lot of use in college, but even kids that are out of college still use them very regularly. And it's one of those things where that's, by society standards, drugs and alcohol are kind of a cool thing,
Yeah.
As long as you don't overdose and hurt yourself, or as long as you don't end up in prison, it's kind of the cool thing to do, is to come over, grab a beer and smoke a joint. And, I've always been a big believer. My brother and I we talked about this from a young age, that, I enjoy having natural fun. And like I said, I still enjoy a good drink. I enjoy going out. I enjoy going to a Ravens game or going to the bar. I get it. And I try to balance it and have fun with it. But there's nothing like getting that natural high and get those endorphins flowing, and that could mean different things. Like that could mean lifting weights. It could mean running. It could mean hiking or mountain climbing, rock climbing. my brother and I have always talked about, it's funny though, because once you reach that high school age, that whole idea of natural fun is kind of tarnished forever, right? It's like all your friends, everybody relies on substances to have fun. Nobody is like, let's go take a hike. So we've always talked about that and thought that was interesting. And maybe that's why I've gravitated toward the weightlifting thing. Like I said, I never did drugs, so I don't even know what that's like. But obviously people compare working out to doing drugs because of the endorphins and the natural high. People talk about like a runner's high. Weightlifters talk about the pump, It's like, there's all sorts of good feelings, and natural feelings associated with physical fitness, which then translates to mental health. And I think it's a really positive thing. But of course, by society standards, the guy that gets in shape and works out, that's deemed to be all those negative things that we talked about.
Yeah.
Sitting back, drinking beer 4 nights a week is pretty cool, and that's why this also, it's a full circle back to that conformist culture. That's why I knew I wanted to break out of that. Yeah. And I think even at the time when I was in it, I think I recognized it, but I didn't do a lot of self-reflection. So I never really, I couldn't really go anywhere. I couldn't really act upon it. I didn't give it a lot of thought, but I subconsciously knew it was there. And then, of course, once I kind of moved on and graduated from that conformist culture, looking back, I went, wow, like my college and high school experiences, they were day and night. I mean, they were day and night. And like we said, those people that haven't graduated that high school mindset, that still live for drinking 3-4 nights a week, going to Ravens games, doing the same thing over and over. That's what they live for. And that's what they do for 30 years. And they marry and they keep doing it. And then their kids do it, and it's the generational thing. It just gets passed down to death. So, breaking out of that and maybe using weightlifting as an outlet instead of smoking pot and doing hard drugs. Maybe that was my way of having fun without getting in trouble. But I think it's healthy. I would recommend it for anybody. And that's why I post. I don't have the most professional, social media going on in the world. I don't have a team behind me, and I probably, if I was to get more serious about it, I would spend more time on it and really, give it a better effort. With sailing and traveling a lot, it makes it difficult. When I'm at sea, I lose signal quite a bit, or they shut off communication. So it would be tough for me to stay consistent like year round, like 365 days a year, while I'm sailing at least. But I like to post. I like to try to push people and challenge people, inspire people. I know that worked for me. Having friends that were pushing me and encouraging me to do better. So I do. And I love, like, when people reach out to me, you're probably the same way. And I see what you do with like young children, how you coach them and you teach them and you mentor them. I mean, what like a powerful, great thing. And it feels good, right? It's like being able to help people. It's a wonderful thing. And I've always loved, ever since I've gotten into like weightlifting and health and fitness. I don't have any degrees in it. I just went to an academy. I learned just by doing it. I didn't study it. I learned just by throwing around weights for hours a day, and experimenting with diet. But I love when people like message me and reach out to me and say, hey man, like, here's where I'm at. Here's what I want to do. And sometimes I might be frank with them and be like, hey man, that's not at all what you want to do. You want to try something different. Based on what I've learned and based on the time that I wasted making those mistakes. So, but I love helping people out and saying, like, cause it's like bringing people on your team. It's like saying, hey, you should put down the bong and the cigarettes and the alcohol, at least temporarily. And you should try this, come join our team and like get healthy, work out, get a good routine, eat better, feel better about yourself, I encourage anybody, and like, I'm always available to answer messages and to give advice on whatever it is. But I do, like I said, back to what you're doing. I love keeping up with you on social media and seeing what you're doing to give back, because I think that's a big piece of it.
Yeah, man. I don't know about you, but I feel like once you have experience like that same sort of thing, like people reaching out to you and you being able to like give them value and provide for them, like that to me is the ultimate source of fulfillment. I mean, they're like I'm doing so many things, but there's nothing I like more than teaching kids and like shaping the young minds, and then also just
when people reach out to me and I can help them with, maybe it's one thing, or somebody listens to a podcast and maybe they took something of value, bro. Like that's why, you know, I appreciate you coming on here, because I think people need to hear, especially from because we grew up very, you know, similar for the most part. And so,
Right.
you know, I think that's one of those things, man, that that is really cool what you're doing. It's like your boys who got you into it, man. It's like, if there wasn't that person who was looking out for the next person, then you wouldn't be where you're at right now.
I couldn't agree. Dude, you just read my mind. It's funny. I was just going to say that. Like, I'm sure you think back on like your journey so far, right? And you probably can identify like certain individuals who had like an influence on you and kind of shaped you the way you are now. And I could do the same thing. Like, I look back, and I mentioned it earlier. I mentioned it earlier during my kind of story about how there were like key players throughout my life who basically instilled these things in me, whether it was friends, whether it was my brother, whether it was my C partner. You know, the kid that got me back in the gym when I was at C, he's one of my best friends from college. And I always kind of joke with him and I say, dude, you're the reason, like you are the reason that I got so into weightlifting. And I'll say, like, look at the crazy guy that you created, you know, like, I'm like, look what you did to me, man. Like, can you believe it? But if he hadn't encouraged me at that moment, like, hey, I know you're busy with schoolwork on the ship, but why don't you just give it a try? If he didn't do it and drag me down there, I might not be sitting here talking to you. I might still be 170 pounds, like malnourished, like, you know, I might still just be, you know, eating whatever the hell I want, playing video games, like doing whatever. But so there are key players. And I mentioned my trainer in high school. You know, I still text him. I still stay in contact with this guy from the Maryland Athletic Club. And it's funny because he wasn't a bodybuilding guy. I didn't do bodybuilding with him. It was more functional. It was training for lacrosse. So it was kettlebells and it was, you know, wind sprints and it was pushing sleds, a lot more functional stuff. But he's like probably the first person that I actually worked with in like the fitness world. And he really gave some good advice to me and my brother. And he would sit us down and say, listen, guys, like, you got to stop screwing around. You got to stop, you know, making bad decisions. You know, he would say, like, you've got to take this stuff seriously. You know, we would work out on Saturday morning. So he would say, don't be out Friday night late making bad decisions, because I expect you to be here early Saturday morning, which for a high school kid, you know, you're like, man, like, so now you're like, well, I got to change my social life a little bit. And I can't be running around till 3, 4 a.m. on Friday night because I have a workout in the morning. So he really did kind of like instill this like structure and this kind of seriousness in us. And he was big on the tough love thing. We would always joke. There was name calling, there was joking, which, you know, I realized at the time I liked it. It got me going. It kind of motivated me and riled me up. And that was a big influence on me. And I never ended up doing the kettlebell thing. Really, that's not like my area of focus. I kind of moved away from that into the more traditional weightlifting bodybuilding thing. But had not like sparked that initial interest in me, I may have never cared for it in college or even considered going to that college. Yeah. And I remember seeing results with him specifically, actually, just real quick. When I was in high school, I never weightlifted or did anything. And I do remember the one time I went in the gym with a shirt on and I looked in the mirror and I was probably doing some overhead press with kettlebells. And I'm like, good Lord, is that a bicep? You know, like, is that like a hint of a bicep that I'm looking at? And seeing that like first tiny bit of progress was like, what if I took it seriously? And his message was like, do not squander, do not waste time in your teenage years and your early 20s. Because he told me, he said, Charley, if you waste time now during high school and college and you wait until you're 25 or 30 to get in shape, he's like, good luck, because your body's already on the decline. Your testosterone levels will not be as high. So he said, you have to start now and you have to take it seriously. And I'm so glad he said that, because I think a lot of people do graduate college and then they realize, or maybe they realize when they're 25 or 30, they go, you know what, I'm really out of shape. I got to start taking this stuff seriously. And they're so far behind the curve that it's now they have to dig themselves out of a hole, and they don't have the knowledge and foundation that someone like you has, you know, who studied this stuff and become an expert on it.
Yeah, man, it's one of those things. It's cool that you're able to look at stuff from the past and just see how it's helped you, even stuff that at the time you didn't realize. And I think that that's, and that just goes to show like friends and mentors, how important they are. Like, not like people say mentors, but dude, friends, like your friends and mentors, like you were just describing, have had really the biggest impact. So, just I think understanding that. And I look at this from private school too. I try to look at everything with, and it sounds like you do too, for from what I'm saying, but it really just sounds like, we're looking at stuff that happened in the past. And while we look back in hindsight and we're like, man, that was rough, or man, like I wasn't doing the right thing, you're able to take a piece and learn from everything. Like, I'm super happy I went to private school, because now I learned so much shit that I'm able to, and just, everything that goes bad, maybe every bad relationship, but it's awesome for me to see that you're able to do that same thing and kind of like keep that perspective and realize that your high school trainer, from Maryland Athletic Club, was dropping seeds that were going to help you along the way. It's cool to be able for you to have that perspective, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And it's funny because I think, at the time he probably didn't realize it. And I've reached out to him recently. He's just like, oh, here's another private school kid with long hair who doesn't, and at the time I didn't take his workout seriously. And I would talk back to him because we were friends, we would joke, and I'd talk back, and I'd complain and I'd whine about it. And he's thinking, here's this kid coming in again who really could care less, who just wants to get to lacrosse season and get through it. But I stay in touch with him, and I'll text him, quite a bit, and I'll send him like updates, pictures or videos, or I'll ask him advice. And I've let him know, I let him know that like he did have a big impact, and I thanked him for it, and just said, I don't think you realize, but it is a big impact. And I think you mentioned an interesting point of bad experiences, right? You talk about even you learn from those. Something they taught us when I was in college, something that they kind of focused on was, leadership. Is that word is thrown around a lot, especially at like a service academy. You hear it every day, leadership, and they're trying to pound it in your brain and teach you about it and what's a good leader and what's a bad leader. But I think one of the best things that I heard, and the best piece of advice that I heard, was that, if you get on a ship, for example, if I get on a ship and you're stuck with a bad crew, you're stuck with, guys that you just don't like. Or if you're in the military, wherever you are, it could be the workplace, it could be school. If you're stuck with people that you just don't like, sometimes you have to put up with them. They might be your boss, they might be your direct boss. But what they would tell us is learn, study that person and learn, and learn what not to do. That's the important thing, right? So you could look at the situation and complain and say, this is terrible, and I don't deserve this, and this is unfair, and this guy's a jerk, and I need a better boss. And that's very valid, but they really harped on, you're going to always deal with jerks, right? You're always going to deal with people that are jerks and people that are unfair, and people that are old and grumpy and whatever it is. And you've got to just learn. And because you're not always going to have good leaders. You're not always going to be surrounded by good leaders. And part of leadership is knowing like what's right and what's wrong. So, it's great to have a good boss and to have a good leader that you want to emulate and say, I really want to be like this guy one day. But it's also just as valuable, if not more valuable, to work for a guy that you absolutely hate.
Right.
And say, this is exactly, now I know what I don't want to be. And I think that's more valuable, because anybody can be nice and this, and that. But when you see somebody that micromanages, right, or that, that has really bad leadership qualities, I think it's like an incredible learning experience to say, that's exactly what I don't want to be. And then you actively work to avoid it and to never do that, to maybe like your subordinates or your coworkers or your family or whatever. So I think it's important to use those negative experiences and turn them into positives, for sure.
Definitely, bro. And I would argue that they're even probably more beneficial, because, how often you see somebody who's, very successful, who hasn't faced tons of adversity or hasn't had, a shitty boss or, maybe a bad childhood. And so, yeah, bro, that's one of the things that once you can gain that perspective to understand that there's goods in everything, like, bro, the quarantine, there's so much good that's come out of this for me. So actually, let's go ahead and transition to that. What's one thing that you've taken away from quarantine that'll help you just going forward?
Yeah, I agree. It's funny, when this whole thing started, the gym's closed, and I thought, all right, this is not ideal. And I was like, I got to figure this out. I didn't know what I was going to do. Am I going to run? Am I going to do body weight? I ended up going to Lowe's and getting cinder blocks and a metal pipe, and I got some resistance bands. So I made it work. I just got creative. I found a way to work out. Obviously, it wasn't as easy or as effective maybe as actually going to a gym and having all the equipment, but I got real creative and I had fun with it. And I talked about it a little bit on my Instagram. My motivation, it was pretty low at times, because it's like, for me, going to the gym is kind of an event, and I get hyped up and I'm playing music and you see different people, and it's kind of a social interaction too. So, working out by yourself in a cold garage is a different experience. So my motivation was low, but I knew that I had to just commit and stay disciplined and just show up, show up every day, go as much as I can. And I missed certain days. There were days where I slept all day and I felt lazy. But I was very consistent, and I was just disciplined, and I just kept going as much as possible. And on the mental aspect, because, of course I talk about the physical aspect a lot, but I decided back when the quarantine thing happened that I was going to go to the bookstore and get a couple books, because I've always loved reading, and I've loved reading about topics that interest me. In school, I hated it because, the teachers just hand you a terrible book written in like the 1700s. And it's like, why, nobody enjoys this at all. But, but I've always loved reading about topics that interest me. I think most people do. And so I kind of like set a goal, like, the physical fitness thing is awesome, but like we said, you got to stay sharp too. You got to keep your mind sharp. So I actually, one day I ran over to Barnes and Noble in Baltimore, and I grabbed a couple books, and then I blew through those in probably 2 weeks. And then I actually switched over to like an iPad, and now I use the app because it's a lot more convenient. It's just easier to get the ebooks, download them offline. But so now I've been just downloading books to my phone or my iPad and just reading a lot. And of course, I'm not working out as much as I once was before the quarantine happened. The intensity also isn't there. I'm not doing these crazy workouts like I did when I had the gym open. But I'm staying physically active. I'm running a little bit more. I'm doing walks. I did a couple bike rides actually. And I'm just trying to keep sharp. I'm trying to read a lot. I'm trying to take advantage of the downtime. And while I'm quarantined, waiting to get on a ship, I'm just trying to learn, because, if I have all this free time, I would hate to waste it. Absolutely. And just stare at the wall or just stare at the TV all day. Yeah. So I'm just trying to, improve in many different ways.
Dude, I love that, man. I love that. Yeah, because that's one of the things, man. If you're one dimensional, or if you haven't, built up those habits to create that discipline, then the quarantine's gonna eat you alive, man. So it's cool to see that you're making it work. You're adapting. You're changing up your style, learning. That's always cool to see. Oh shit. So I got 13%, but I do want to make sure we get the last thing I do, which is gonna be basically, I don't know if I told you this one before, but it's if you could just leave anybody with one thing. Maybe we have said it so far, maybe we haven't said it, but if you could leave people with just one core piece of advice, just one thing from the podcast to stick with them, that you experience, what would that be? Yeah.
So I was thinking about this, and I actually just read a book. Speaking about reading books, I read a book called The 10 Times Rule, and it was a great book. And basically, it's about applying 10 times effort to everything. Basically shooting for the stars, right? And that relates to setting goals. It relates to taking action. And it's real motivational. And it's basically, you never want to aim low, because if you miss, then you're gonna hit even lower. You always want to shoot really high. And a lot of times in life, people underestimate the work it takes to do certain things, right? I would have never known how difficult it would be how much time and energy it would take to transform my body. I would have never known that when I first started. And he talks about business. A lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of startups, they underestimate the time and resources and money it takes to grow a business and to become successful. So one of the pieces of advice he leaves the readers in the book, the author writes, and we might have touched on this earlier a little bit, but I thought this was a great point. He writes that whatever you're doing, you've got to commit. You've got to take 10 times action, right? And you've got to just go full speed ahead down the tracks. And we talked about kind of the naysayers, right? There's always, in life, it's the rule of life. The more you do, the more successful you are, the more you accomplish, the more you put yourself out there, the more naysayers there's going to be, the more criticism, the more negative comments, right? The more judgment you'll face. So his big message is that you've got to go down those tracks at full speed, right? And whatever it is that you're into, you've got to attack it 110% effort and let people know that you're fully committed, right? And once they understand, once they realize that you are fully committed and you're not turning back, they're going to get out of your way. They're going to step off the tracks. And I thought that was a really interesting statement because we talked about family and friends and even just peers who might distract you and who might try to, pull you away or shift your focus. And like I said, maybe it's not for bad reasons. Maybe it's because they care about you. But I think it's true in life, everywhere in life, in business, in school, working out, whatever it is. I think that you've really got to commit. You've got to go all in. You've got to put the criticism. You got to put all that aside. Put on the horse blinders, and just and commit yourself and go all in. And like he says in the book, people, once they realize that train's coming down the tracks, they're going to stop. They not going to be standing there on the tracks anymore. They'll get out your way. So I thought that was powerful. I also thought it was accurate.
Yeah. Dude, I love that.
I think that's a good message, like a strong, good message, because I think it's true. And there are a lot of distractions in life, as you've seen. And there's people that will tell you, Tommie, whatever you're doing is not the right thing. And deep down inside that it is, and that's what you want to do. And that's what makes you happy. And once they realize that you're doing it anyway, and you're not going to stop because they told you to stop, then they're just going to give up. They're going to stop trying to discourage you.
Yeah, man. Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's a shame because I think a lot of people are maybe on the right track and then they will let somebody maybe tell them that they're not doing it. But I think to your point, like, I think once you do go 10X, man, like there's no stopping you, man. People are either you're going to get off the tracks and get run over. I like that. That's powerful shit, bro.
Very powerful, so.
Yeah. Well, dude, let's see, man. Where can people find you? I know you're going to be on a ship in a couple of days, but like, so.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah,
I will. You can go to my fitness Instagram at Charley Hughes Fit. I'll try to keep it updated best I can. I throw out random content here and there. On the ship, whenever I get signal, I'll try to throw some stuff out and keep it updated. I do want to improve. That's like a goal of mine. I want to eventually improve on the social media side of it and get a little bit more serious, especially as I get more serious like about my training and whatnot. But yeah, you can find me on my Instagram page.
Nice.
And like I said, feel free to shoot me a message and reach out, and I'm always available to help and give advice or whatever it is. So
yeah, man, dude, I appreciate you coming on and making the time, bro. It means a lot. It's gonna be a good episode. I'm excited for it, and I know people are gonna enjoy it for sure.
Thank you. You're the man. I appreciate it, Tommie.
Sweet. You did it. You made it to the end of the episode. Thank you guys so much for listening or watching the podcast. Be sure to go like it, subscribe, share, all that stuff that you're supposed to say at the end of the podcast. Thank you guys again, and stay tuned every Thursday, powerful1.com/podcast, or on the Instagram page at powerful0ne powerful1. Thank you guys again. And again, last thing, if you guys are interested in being on the podcast, hit me up. If you got a cool story and feel like you really fit the mold for Powerful One, hit me up. We'll get you on the podcast. Thank you guys. Stay safe.